Welcome back. We begin a new modeling and lighting exercise today. We start with the default cube, which we raise 1 unit upward so that the base of the cube matches the XY plane. Then G, Z to constrain us along the Z axis, 1 to move upward. Since the cube is side 2 by moving up by 1, we will go exactly to rest on the plane. We are going to create an arched portal. It will have a thickness of 30 centimeters. We can set it in the item tab along the y-axis, which is the green line, so 0.3. Let's set the width that would be on the x-axis to 6 meters and then go into edit mode. Select the top face of what will be our arch, enable the displacement manipulator and move up another meter. Let's exit edit mode. We see the final dimensions of our object 6 meters by 0, 3 by 3, which however are the result of a scale effect. For Blender right now, the object we see is not actually like that. That is, if I now applied the scale to 1. For Blender, the object would look like this. Don't do that. Let's leave it that way. How do we make sure that instead we have the object physically this size natively? Let's apply scale. With Ctrl+A, we bring up the Apply menu and, among the various things we can apply, we find Scale. So now natively the scale is 111 on all 3 axes, and consequently the dimensions we had set are just the final ones. We also have the origin of our object left there where the origin of the cube used to be. We want to put it in the center of the axes, and we can do that by applying the position as well. With Ctrl+A, we always call up the Apply menu and select Location. By doing so, the position of our object will also be natively at 0, 0, 0 on the axis of our scene. Let's go now to insert a cylinder. With Shift+A, we call up the Add menu, go to Mesh and select Cylinder. We rotate this cylinder 90 degrees along the x-axis so that it is horizontal. We do that here in the lower left-hand corner in the options that are given to us when we invoke the add command. So rotation along the x-axis, let's put 90. Then we're going to scale the cylinder so that it goes into an arc. We know that our wall is 6 wide. We leave them 2 columns of half a meter each, so from 6 we consider 5. That divided by 2 is 2.5. There we have created just the shape of our arc. What we are going to do now is to subtract the cylinder from the wall in order to create the shape. To do this, we use a modifier. We select the wall, go to the modifiers section, click Add Modifier. So we can go and search for the modifier we need. In this case, it is Generate. Boolean, or we can just type bool, and we see that Blender shows us with the search criterion bool all the modifiers that start precisely with these letters. In this case, there is only one, Boolean. So, Boolean is used to create sums, subtractions, intersections between meshes. In this case, we are going to ask the modifier to go and subtract the cylinder. We see that right now there is a red icon that alerts us precisely that he doesn't know what he has to subtract. He doesn't know yet. Let's go to point here. We click in the menu. We see that there is only one selectable object because within our scene we have only 2 meshes. One is the one we are applying the modifier to. The other is precisely the cylinder. We can then select our object from here, or we can use the dropper and go and select it within the 3D viewport. Let's do it. Here, on the surface, nothing seems to have changed, but if we select our cylinder and hide it by pressing the H key, this is the equivalent of pressing the eye icon inside the outliner, here we see our arc applied to the wall we had created. Let's go back to displaying our cylinder. And we select our wall to go and remove the Boolean modifier. What happened? We are back exactly to the initial geometry. This is because, as we have said in previous lessons, modifiers are non-destructive algorithms. That is, until we go to apply them permanently, our geometry is still the original geometry. That is, we can always go back to the starting point. This operation we did of applying a modifier so that one mesh is subtracted from another mesh, we can do much faster by using an add-on that is present by default within Blender, but may be disabled by default. So let's check it out. Let's go into Blender's preferences, then go to the add-ons section and look for Bool. I, in this case, have already activated it. If you, on the other hand, see it with a blank box, check it so that it is active. Well, how do you use this Bool tool add-on now? It's very simple. We first select the cylinder, then, holding down the Shift key, we also go and select the wall from which we want to subtract it. Then the last selected object, which remains precisely the active object you see the lighter edge, is the object to which the modifier will be applied. So always remember, what is the last thing we have to go and select? It is that object to which we will have to go and apply the modifier, which is the precisely active object. At this point, we press the keyboard shortcut, Ctrl+. By doing this automatically, not only has the Boolean modifier been added, but the cylinder has been selected as the subtraction object, and Blender automatically went and made our cylinder invisible. The cylinder still exists, it's still there, it's still visible inside the outliner. However, the icon with the camera has been deselected, so the cylinder is not rendered. Plus, instead of showing us its shape, we are shown its footprint. This allows us to select our cylinder at any time, and for example, we can move it in real time, we can scale it, we can move it freely. How can we get back to normal viewing? Meanwhile, we can go into edit mode and see what it looks like, but if we want to get back to normal viewing inside the 3D viewport, we'll just go into the object panel, go to the viewport display section, and in the display as, instead of bounds, which would be the overall dimensions of our object, we can go and select solid or texture. That is, this is the menu that tells us for each individual object what is the maximum quality with which this object will be displayed within the 3D viewport. In this case, bounds. Let's leave it that way because it's convenient for us to see where it is. However, it's also convenient for us to see what the resulting mesh looks like from this application of the Boolean modifier. What we are going to do now is to create a repeat of our arc, and we will use a second modifier to do so. In this case, we are going to use an array. So let's click on Add Modifier. Let's look for Array and uncheck Relative Offset. Instead, we're going to enter a constant offset, i.e., we're going to decide just how much the copy should move relative to the original. We are not going to move along the x-axis, so we put 0, but we are going to move along the y-axis, the green line, by, for example, let's try 6 meters. Let's increase the number of copies, and here we see precisely our corridor going to form. Let's make them a little further apart. Instead of 6, let's set it to 8, for example. Now let's go and create instead what will be the arch of the vaulted ceiling of the hallway. We can use the same cylinder that we use for the Boolean operation. We duplicate it with Shift plus D. However, precisely we have to go back to have it displayed. This maybe let's just call it Volta. So we remember that it is really just another object. Let's go to the object, viewport display section, and instead of bounds, let's go and select textured. It's just like any other object. We can display it at its maximum quality, which is always a solid in this case anyway. Plus we're going to tell Blender that we want it to show up in the render viewport, but we'll see later when we launch the render that there's still a little bit more to edit. What we do now is we move this cylinder. Let's enable the snap at the vertices. Then we drag via the displacement manipulator until we get against the other arc, then hold down the Ctrl key. By doing this, we are going right up against the next element of the arc. Then we scale our cylinder slightly, so S, and we're going to widen it a little bit. We can also go by I in this case. Then we enter Edit mode. We switch to face selection mode by pressing the 3 key. We select the cylinder head faces. Press X to bring up the delete menu and go to select faces. That is, we go to delete the head faces, so that leaves an empty cylinder. After that, we go to select these two faces at the bottom, and with Ctrl++, the plus of the numeric keypad, we go to increase the selection. We're going to do this several times until we go to select all the faces that would be below the floor. This is something that you can safely do by hand. You can select each individual face by holding down the Shift key, or you can select the first one and with the Satchel key go and select the next ones. This function of Satchel plus can be very useful when you find yourself having to enlarge the current selection, so keep it in mind because it will come in handy in many other situations. We then press X to delete the selected faces. Let's now go to select the edges instead. So key 2, hold down the Alt key and select the arc, then click on the green arrow and drag back to go to the other arc. With the Ctrl key, we anchor the edge by activating the snap. We come out of edit mode and there we have created the vault as well. Now we are going to add an array modifier to this object so that we have repetition in subsequent segments. Let's click in the wrench icon and click Add Modifier, then type Array. By default, Blender always suggests a relative offset, but we instead want a precise offset of the displacement this time, so we disable relative and go to select Constant Offset. On the x-axis we have no displacement, so we set 0, while on the y-axis we're going to displace by a value that is the length of our object plus the 30 centimeters. I see now that by mistake I put it a little bit further forward, so I go into edit mode, I select the wireframe view, then with the Alt key I go to select the arc of the vault. The Alt key allows us to select the whole loop of edges, the whole turn, so since I already have the displacement manipulator selected, I go to act always on the y-axis, the green arrow. I move back, and with the Ctrl key I activate the snap to go to anchor on the edge of the arch. There. In doing so, the length of the arc is 7 exactly. I go back to set up the solid view and point out that the length of the vault is 7.7, but in the z-axis, because in reality our cylinder is rotated 90 degrees. This happened when we inserted it, and we set the view options down here on the bottom left, so we have to make sure that we make this rotation native. If we want to make sure that actually the 7.7 value is on the y-axis, and to make the rotation native, we use the apply command. So Ctrl plus A, apply, rotation. And by doing so, you see the z value became 2.78, so the height of the vault and the length became 7. I also point out that the scale is also not equal to 1 because we had scaled the cylinder, so we also apply the scale. Scale. Here we now have the vault natively this size and the rotation is also correctly applied. We can now return to our array modifier. We said we want to duplicate it by one distance, constant, so on the y-axis we go to set 7.7. Plus the thickness of the arc we set at 30 centimeters, so the total offset should be 8 meters. We go to verify, and indeed the offset is correct. Let us increase the number of repetitions to 3. And in doing so, we have completed our bow. Of course we can make it longer as we like. Now for example, I'll try with 4. Of course we would also need to add an element to the arc. While our arch has a thickness of 30 centimeters, the vault is completely flat. That is, it has no thickness. It is an infinitely thin sheet. If, on the other hand, we want to give it a real thickness, say 15 centimeters, we can do this through an additional modifier. This modifier is called solidify. Let's see how it works by isolating the vault. So we select it, press the V key, the one above the 9 key on the keypad, making the vault object as the only visible element within the 3D viewport. By pressing the key again, we go back to displaying everything as before. Let us always remember, key isolates the object. Let's pick up the key again to reposition everything again. There we've isolated everything. Let's momentarily disable the array modifier. Let's click in the monitor icon so that we only see the native vault and go and add a new modifier. This modifier is called solidify. Let's look it up. Solidify. Here it is. Here we have the option of setting the thickness of the wall we want to go and create. In this case, let's say 15 centimeters, so 0.15 meters. We see that this thickness has been created, so we can decide whether to apply this offset inward or outward. This behavior is allowed to us by the offset parameter. One inward, one outward. All intermediate values allow us to vary this difference from the starting vault. If we go into edit mode, we see it much better. You see, varying the offset parameter varies this offset position. I, in this case, put it 1 so that I have it outward. For the moment, let's not care about the other options. I remind you that if you search within my channel, you will find in-depth videos, especially in the playlist dedicated to modeling. In Blender, you will find just a series of videos that goes to see item by item what are the options of the modifiers. In addition, if you go to the blenderclick.it website, you will find just the index with all the topics covered in all my videos, and then you will be able to find just every single entry and go and see the meaning precisely of the various options. We exit edit mode, resume the masking key to return to display everything, and also go again to re-enable the array modifier display. Here we have created our tunnel. Let's go and insert the floor with Shift+A. Let's insert a plane. This plane will need to be at least 20 feet wide. To go and get, let's say, the width of our arc. Then we enter edit mode, select the inside edge, and drag it all the way down. Maybe with the snap we can just go and anchor to the last element of the arc. Then, since the edge is still selected, I press E to extrude, cease to bind upward, and I go to extrude to the top of the arch. By doing that, I'm really going to close the wall so that I have a closure. Of course, you decide whether to do that or not. Right now, I prefer to keep it closed, just to go and illuminate the gallery with side windows. Before we go any further, let's give names with a little more logic. We named the vault correctly. Let's also rename the arch, so instead of cube, we call it arch. Then the plane, we call the floor. Finally, the cylinder that we used as the subtraction element, we can leave it as the name cylinder. However, I usually go and add a prefix, for example, bool, so that way I remember that it is an object that I used to perform a Boolean operation. Even better if we are going to move this object to an appropriate collection. We press the M key to invoke the Move to Collection command and select a new collection, then New Collection. And we call it bool. Of course, we can call the collection whatever we like. However, let's say that by calling it bool, we are reminding ourselves that it is a folder in which we put all those objects that we use to do subtractions. So here inside the outliner, we have two collections, the default one and bool. Bool, in turn, we can turn it off so that we don't even see the outline anymore. Of course, at any time, we can go and reactivate it and go and modify the contents.